So now we're going to hear from Peggy Luhrs. Peggy is from the United States of America. She's came out in 1979 and started a lesbian feminist rap group. She was founder of Women Against Rape and Common Woman editor. She headed the Women's Council for a decade and taught ecofeminism at the Institute for Social Ecology. Feminist Media Review, her Access TV show, has run for over 20 years. She's also a designer builder of several houses. Peggy is going to talk to us about the impacts of trans rights activists on lesbians, and her talk is called Lesbians, the Ultimate Loose Women. Thank you so much, Peggy, for speaking to us, and over to you.
Some women have said that they're tired of hearing about the past, but the threads of oppression continue. So what I wanted to do today is trace those strands and see what continues and how it differs now. I came out actually in 1973. I started the first lesbian rap group in Vermont with the woman who had become my first lesbian lover that very night. I came out of a 7-year marriage, living with my 3-year-old son, Justin, and seeing him off to his dad on weekends. Lesbians were a big part of the growing women's liberation movement, but we made many liberal feminists nervous, and we had to struggle to be recognized. It took the Lavender Menace to startle now into the awareness of how many we are and how big a part of the women's movement we are still. I was one of a group of mainly lesbians who started Women Against Rape, WAR, W-A-R, in 1973. Later, we opened the hotline to battered women, and we were immediately inundated with calls. We housed women in safe homes until we found a suitable shelter. WAR became the Women's Rape Crisis Center, and then Hope Works, and Women Helping Battered Women became Steps to End Domestic Violence. Federal money brought in men. Women came out of the group's name. The agents were deleted, a mistake. We need sources of funding that do not demand our service to men. In the early 70s, lesbians were not represented anywhere in the media. It's hard to explain how there was nothing. Sappho Was a Right-On Woman was out, and I once put that, there was a fence downtown, and I wrote that across almost a whole city block. And I met a woman who sat in the patisserie and was so thrilled to see it. And Sappho Was a Right-On Woman was out, and Rita Mae Brown was at Goddard College reading her as yet unpublished Ruby Fruit Jungle. I went with Faye to hear her read a chapter. Our small rap group grew. We had a women's center in the downtown supported by monthly pledges. The space was big enough for dances, which we organized. Lesbians started a collectively run newspaper called Common Woman. This would be a good time to show a picture. And the other one is a picture of the cover of Common Woman covering the action we did. The action we did was that we curfewed men. We got a very official looking, and it's on that page, picture of the seal of the city. We said, due to the rising incidence of rape, men need to be off the street at 10 o'clock. And if they needed permission, they could call the mayor, the head of the university, or the editor of the paper. We made a big impact. We were on the top of the fold in the local paper, and men were furious and calling all of these people, about their movements being circumscribed. So we made our point. One morning I went to see a friend, and she held up a copy of something with a picture of an Amazon on the cover. This was quite exciting at the time. I had never seen Amazons represented anywhere, and this was a lesbian feminist art journal. So that was very exciting for me at the time. We were out there, and there were wonderful articles in that. You can find some of it online. When I get asked nowadays, how can you be so horrible to trans people? They struggle the same as you did coming out. Well, this question lets me know the person has no clue of our history. We were a liberation movement. We wanted to be openly lesbians. Our demands took nothing from other people. We did not tell the civil rights movement that preceded and inspired us that they should center lesbians or block their venues and accuse them of ignoring our desires. We did not have every organ of state power behind us. The speed of the takeover of LGBT organizations and the disruption of every lesbian group were my first clues that this was nothing like the reception we got in the early 70s when all of church and state aligned against us. Another question I get is, but lesbians can assault women in public restrooms, don't they? Yet lesbians don't prey on other women, or believe me, we would hear about it. As lesbians are way overrepresented in prison, 25 to 40% of the prison population is lesbian or bisexual women, even though we're probably less than 5% of the population. It's not because lesbians are more violent than other women. It's more because patriarchy demands that we be tied to men. We lesbians are loose women, not in the sense of being lewd women, but because lesbians refuse those ties and choose women and their female selves. These are some of the forces used against lesbians. Corrective rape. There is a long and sadly continuing history of corrective rape. There have been a lot of reports of this in South Africa. But corrective rape has a new face. Now men try to shame lesbians into sex with accusations of transphobia or genital fetishism to women who refuse. And as Angela Wild's research has shown, they are not reluctant to use force or rape if those women don't capitulate. Another way we are oppressed is we are fetishized and pornified. Google lesbian and you go through pages of porn sites before you get to any lesbian organization. Any woman or girl not conforming to the current style of femininity derived from porn is seen as masculine and will be asked when she's transing. Another one is the historic practice of locking lesbians away in mental institutions or lobotomizing them is not as prevalent as it once was. Now, women and girls with a mental trauma or body dissociation who are likely to be lesbians are slated for hormonal or surgical treatment that claims affirmation will cure their distress. Lesbians have also always been deemed unnatural and not real women. We used to be considered men. Now we are meant to buy the absurdity that men are lesbians. And this has meant male monopolizing of lesbian dating sites, another way to keep us from connecting. Currently, rapid onset gender dysphoria is rampant. Puberty blockers are given to children. Girls with no sexual experience are cutting off breasts before they even have a sex life. Entire friendship groups declare trans status in this social contagion. Left alone, most of these girls would be lesbians. Our future lesbians are being scarred for life or worse. This is a horrific conversion therapy, as bad or worse than the former practice of chemically castrating homosexuals using the very same chemicals. Lesbian feminists did two unpardonable things: proposed and promulgated a female-centered, non-phallic sexuality with relationships based in equality. And we said, in the words of the great Malvina Reynolds song, we don't need the men. We don't need the men. The Daughters of Bilitis had formed in the 50s. In 1969, Stonewall erupted and unleashed gay and lesbian liberation. Once in the Gay Liberation Front, lesbians opposed men promoting the North American Man-Boy Love Association, NAMBLA. Due to things like this, lesbians began to separate and lesbian liberation was born, as was lesbian feminism and separatism. And I certainly refer anybody who wants to know this history to Unpacking Queer Politics by Sheila Jeffries and many of Sheila's books. The fault lines came early. In the late 70s, The Advocate was printing columns by Pat Califia, the only lesbian to get a regular column in that male publication. Though we convinced them to put the L first in LGB, the gay community was never a great fit for lesbians. I did have to laugh when the Pink News reporter, confronted with "Get the L out" at London Pride, lost his mind, screaming, "This is terrible, terrible. Lesbians are at the front of the parade." Yes, and we're in the front of the letters, but we are still forgotten. San Francisco dykes always start the Pride Parade, the Dykes on Bikes. And I saw this quote from Julia Penelope, and it's very apt, still apt. Whenever lesbians are subsumed under a generic term, whether it is gay or homosexual, and today we would say queer, we would add queer, the subject matter has little or nothing to do with our lives. We are trivial marginalia and digressions. Exactly 43 years ago today, Friday, November, I was in San Francisco on Friday, November 27th, 1978. I took a bus to the Castro, returning. I was just coming back from Thanksgiving in Ukiah. When I got out in the Castro, everything was draped in black. What's happening? I asked the first person I saw. Haven't you heard? Somebody shot Harvey and the mayor. Harvey Milk was the openly gay supervisor of San Francisco, and Mayor Moscone was the mayor, and they were murdered by a hateful man. This set up huge vigils. Holly Near came down and had written her song, "We Are a Gentle, Angry People," especially for this occasion. This was followed by police riots against all gay and lesbian bars. They raided one bar out on the avenues called Peg's Place. The women were taken to the police station in handcuffs and hung up over the pipes there. And that was reported in Plexus and nowhere else that I know of. And then there was a gay riot after when the murderer was let off on the Twinkie defense that he had eaten too many Twinkies and sugar had made him crazy. And so there was a huge riot, but no one reported about the police riots that went on for several months. That same sojourn in San Francisco, I went to see Samoa host a discussion of BDSM among lesbians at Old Wives' Tales. There was Pat Califia, advocate columnist. Now she and Gail Rubin have begun Samoa to promote sadomasochism to the lesbian community. Samoa opposed women against pornography, setting up the earliest of the feminist sex wars. Just a few weeks prior, I had listened to Mary Daly at the same venue. Unsurprisingly, Miss S&M, Miss Sadomasochism, is now Patrick Califia. Lesbians refuse to be marginal or trivial. We declared lesbian liberation, and we made a whole new culture. We created women's music, women's festivals, bookstores, volumes and volumes of books, newspapers, magazines, coffee houses, bars, and spas, communities, and women's land for collective living. Most of this has been erased. The books can be found with some effort, but the spaces cannot. After the AIDS crisis of the 1980s abated, gay men took over the pride centers and began their collaboration with rich men promoting transgender ideology. I worked at such a center in 2004 and 2005 and found it offered little to lesbians. So I started a lesbian movie night, but my male boss said I had to accept anyone who came in and said they were a woman. I called it Sapphic Cinema, did the graphics, and showed only films that focused on lesbians. Luckily for us, no men ever showed up. My job was running the computer center, which had brand new IBM PCs provided by Tim Gill, a name which meant nothing to me at the time. But I now know this was another early incursion. Jennifer Billick tells us, Tim Gill brings money, lots of money, a background in computer software and technology, very handy if you want to reach a global audience, and starts the largest LGBT NGO in the USA. And he bragged about, Gil bragged about his friendship with John Stryker, who is the Arcus Foundation, which has also co-opted almost pretty much every LGBT organization in the country, and how they were rewarding the good and punishing the bad, was his statement. So the center, working for the center, it was called RU12, sent me to the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force Conference in St. Louis. I was shocked to find no lesbian workshops in this whole two-day event. And there were two workshops about gay men focused on sex. The rest were all trans ideology and trans issues. Lesbians decided to address this by calling for a butch caucus at lunchtime. I went to this and learned that these young women were being pressured to transition. They were mocked as not brave enough to trans. To me, dividing butch into butch and femme is one more concession to gender roles. But these women were saying, we are butch lesbians, and that's what we want to be. We don't like being told that makes us men. That was my first exposure to the coercion affecting young dykes. And that coercion has grown exponentially since then. Lesbians need to be clear that these demands are nothing but the whining of hetero men who are AGPs, autogynephiles, and they want to increase their supply of sexually available women or use women to validate their delusions. Lesbian feminists were a real challenge to our male-defined place in the margins. To shift us back to the margins, off the page and out of the book altogether, men decided pretending to be us would bring them back to being the controllers, the definers of how it is and who we are. They started their movement to replace us with a group of men developing theory to support their paraphilias, and they invented and continue to invent words and phrases to bamboozle everyone and to recruit eggs, that's the young who are seen as not out as trans yet. It's vital to understand the power of words. Karadansky and Julia Long, among others, have made it clear why we cannot repeat the words the gender industry uses. Julia reminds us that when we use the oppressor's language, it affects and infects our own thinking. Using their language gives it power and lessens our own powers of self-definition. The backlash against us is evidence of our power. Small consolation when we are so successfully divided. Capitalist patriarchy with its dual hatred of women and nature has organized a world more misogynist than the 1950s. Martine Rothblatt, who regularly visits Burlington, my city, and funds the local tech jam, says transgenderism is the on-ramp to transhumanism. And we might start calling that non-humanism. So what do we do? Well, we're doing it here in the WHRC, connecting globally. The Women's Liberation Front is holding educational forums and filing important lawsuits. The gender mappers are locating and documenting gender clinics. The TERF Collective is neutralizing that slur and spreading their message with flyers and stickers and demonstrations. Spanish and French women have organized marches, even though they have been violently attacked by male gender activists. Young dykes and women-loving women are using the media of the moment, putting out songs like Born Not Worn and hosting Womb with a View to discuss issues on YouTube. Detransitioners telling their stories on YouTube inspired me to talk about radical feminism on video, as some desisters credit it in helping them understand that they could change their minds and not their bodies. I planned to do radical feminism online, but I found that someone had already put some of my videos from my TV show, from my Access TV show up there. So what we need to know, this is a patriarchal war on women and lesbians, which means a set of power relations is at play and that we cannot educate it away. We must build a counterpower to demand an end to it. Joel Ruby Ryan, a man who heads up gender studies at the University of New Hampshire, my neighboring state, says we need to do away with the word woman. But of course, not men. Why don't his students see the blatant misogyny here? We can educate potential allies. We know most people have no clue what is really going on, having bought the lies, platitudes, and euphemisms spread by the gender industry. Building a new autonomous women's movement is necessary. Can we get ahead of the conversion therapy issues that are coming up? Sending boys and girls into the medical industrial complex is a vicious experimental practice that utterly ignores the code of first do no harm. We need to say so. We need to keep calling it the worst conversion therapy of all time. We do have problems getting our word out. Valerie Solanas, after a list of male faults, says he has one glaring area of superiority over the female: public relations. He has done a brilliant job of convincing millions of women that men are women and women are men, which is Solanas's way of talking about patriarchal reversals. Those interested in Solanas can follow today's session in a breakout room where we will show clips of I Shot Andy Warhol and discuss her. Today, women are not as naive as much of my generation was about the difficulties of women working together. Sisterhood is powerful, but it can also be contentious. We lost women disillusioned by that who gave up on feminism. The worst and most costly betrayals in my own life came from women, sadly. Flo Kennedy, a wonderful Black feminist, said, "If you think power corrupts, try powerlessness." This is difficult work that goes against the grain of our training in submissiveness. One of the rewards is unlearning that submissiveness, claiming our power, claiming our anger, so forbidden to women, but such a necessary engine of change. We can discover ourselves out from under the roles and limitations designed to keep us quiet and small. Tools to fight back. Understand patriarchal reversals so that, or you can call it narcissistic projection, like calling us fascist when their methods are thoroughly authoritarian. Our love for each other is our most potent weapon. It is why our oppressors do their best to divide us and destroy our organizations and try to prevent our coming together. I want to read a little bit from the introduction to Janice Raymond's A Passion for Friends, which I really recommend to everybody. She says, sustained emphasis on female oppression, the state of atrocity, and the communion of resistance can have the undetected effect of making the female experience synonymous with the colonization experience. Female friendship gives depth and spirit to a political vision of feminism and is itself a profoundly political act. Without kind affection, our politics and political struggles remain superficial and more easily short-circuited. Change may occur, but maybe only for a limited time and on levels that do not really shake the foundations of hetero reality. It's not enough for feminists to dissect the corpse of patriarchal pathologies. It's not enough for women to depict the state of hetero reality. Women have not always been for men. We need to know the genealogy of women who did not and who do not exist for men or in pivotal relationship to them. And we need to create a vision of gyne affection. What women search for can be as important as what we find. Our love for each other is our most potent weapon. It's why our oppressors do their best to divide us and destroy our organizations and try to prevent our coming together. The love and joy and camaraderie between women can be a prime motivator. You don't need to be a lesbian to participate in that. You do need to be a woman-identified woman. You do need to give up being mad and succumbing to male approval desire. And now we might need to watch out for left approval desire. And I want to quote here Audre, the great Black lesbian feminist, Audre Lorde, who says, "When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid." So I call for us to share our love and have some courage, sisters. I ran for city council this year. I didn't win, but it did get me some publicity and a chance to talk about the issues. It also got me several articles trying to diss me, which sort of had the same form of going, the journalist who listed themselves with their pronouns went to a couple of people who were trans and they said, "Oh, that's terrible, she's a transphobe, it's scary, scary, terrible things are going to happen to us." The reality is the bad things are happening. There's nothing happening to anyone trans that I know of in Vermont. We have terrible laws that have no lower age for surgery. Christina brought up Shinigami eyes. One of the things that happened to me was one of the things happened to someone else. This young woman who was starting a business catering from her home had lots of customers her first couple of weeks, and then someone using Shinigami eyes found that she was a friend of mine on Facebook, and they started to attack her, and they basically destroyed her business. And a friend of mine lost a job over this, and another woman lost her place, and I have become a pariah in the community that I started. And it just, you know, so this is what happens with this. I mean, I'm okay with that, but I'm not okay with it, but you know, I can deal with it. But it's so annoying that it keeps being a focus on, oh, terrible things are going to happen to trans people. Sort of the same thing happened in the UK this year, where, you know, they're carrying on about Trans Day of Remembrance. No trans person in 3 years has been killed in the UK, but this year 120 women were. And in the US, that's 3 to 5 women a day being killed by domestic violence, or by battering, I should say. Anyway, so that Shinigami eyes is a thing that people use, and you know, it's very hard to get the media to report what happens to us. They still keep up with this, but we'll keep plugging away until it happens.